Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
This is Bloomberg Businessweek. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine, plus global business, finance, and tech news. The Bloomberg Businessweek podcast with Massar and Tim Stenovec from Bloomberg Radio.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Bloomberg Businessweek Weekend podcast. Top of mind for us this week, well, the Apple rally following an event focused on artificial intelligence, which fueled hopes that customers will pay up for the next generation of iPhones. The stock, by the way, hitting a record and overtaking Microsoft in market cap at one point. We'll have more on that in a moment.
Plus, the Fed dialing back rate forecast to just 1 this year. And still on inflation watch, despite encouraging CPI and PPI readings this past week. We'll get into one part of the Fed's dual mandate: jobs.
Also, the conversation this week that we just can't stop talking about. It involves Henry Ford, Bill Clinton, Toyota, the lean Taliban, McKinsey, and more, and explains so much in our world.
Peter S. Goodman with a deep dive on his new book, How the World Ran Out of Everything. He stops by a little later. All that to come. We begin, though, with the Fed and the U.S. labor market. Fed Chair Jay Powell noting that broad data suggests the U.S. job market is back to pre-COVID levels and strong but cooling. And that if jobs were to weaken unexpectedly, the Fed is ready to respond.
This is against a backdrop where we see fewer people quitting their jobs and fewer getting promoted, leaving little room for new workers to break through as the ranks of employees above them stay in place, and it makes it more difficult for young graduates to get their foot in the door.
For more, we caught up with Jane Oates, Senior Policy Advisor at Working Nation. It's a media company that focuses on the future of work. Also, she's former Assistant Secretary of Employment and Training in the Obama administration. We talked with her before that Fed decision.
Look, obviously the economy's tightening slightly. It couldn't stay where it was, with 3 jobs for everybody looking. So it's tightening a little bit. But, I think people are not moving, and it's creating a real logjam. We have 4 million people leaving college this time of year, and another 1.5 million leaving high school and that want to go right into the workforce. It's going to be tough for the next few months.
I don't get it. It's just kind of wild, right? Like, we talk about a tight labor market. People need workers, and yet, right, it's just these weird kind of, cross currents. It's hard to make sense to some extent about what really is going on in the labor market.
I mean, look, Carol, some of it's geography. There are all these jobs open, but they're in places where there aren't people looking. Some of it's a skills mismatch. And some of it, I have to tell you, I like to blame the automated software that's looking at resumes. I think that businesses are missing a lot of talented people because whatever they forgot to put in their cover letter and on their resume isn't matching the language in the job description, so they're not getting the job.
Does it work both ways? I was talking to somebody who was doing some hiring ahead of intern season, and she told me this is a shocking number. There are basically 30 places for interns at the organization that she works in. They got thousands of applications, Jane, for those 30 spots. And I'm thinking to myself, how are you getting so many applicants? Are people just doing this automatically? Are they sending? How does this work?
I think people are really interested in this paid internship thing. They realize that it's work-based learning at its best because they don't make a long-term commitment like in a registered apprenticeship program. But they're able to get in, see if they like the employer, see if they like the work. So it is really hot right now to get a paid internship. An internship of any kind, but most people need the salary to go along with it. But I understand. I like business too much to hound on them. But I do think, I know how cumbersome. They have to keep their business going. They don't have time to look at thousands of applications for 30 open internships. You're right, Tim. I get that.
One of the things I keep thinking about the future workforce, because it seems like globalization has really increasingly gotten rid of middle-class, well-paying jobs that really allowed people to have a good life, buy a home, support their family, go on vacation, and that we've kind of gotten rid of a lot of those jobs in the middle sector, if you will. And I do wonder kind of if we're not, fertility rates are low, people, where's the future workforce going to be? Is it going to be robotic, automated, AI? I'm trying to understand kind of where this all goes ultimately.
Well, AI is going to influence every job that's out there. And it's also going to influence.
But how? We keep saying like these big, broad things about AI, Jane. I'm curious how you see specifically that AI, which has been around for decades and already impacts our world, how the next generation of AI and large language models and so on really change significantly the workforce.
So there's going to be some immediate changes that are easy to see and some that are less easy to describe. But let's look at PR firms, right? PR firms used to hire lots of people. Junior staff people would come in. They'd write the first draft of something for a customer, and then somebody more senior would edit it and finesse it because they know the customer better. Right now, people are using generative AI to do that first draft. So you see real slowdown in hiring. You see a real problem in coding. AI can write code faster than any human. And basically all those people who went to coding camps 10 years ago are looking at a very limited shelf life right now. Those are two easy examples.
That was Jane Oates, Senior Policy Advisor at Working Nation and former Assistant Secretary of Employment and Training in the Obama administration. For more on the complete Fed decision, head on over to Bloomberg.com.
Now to another big story this past week. Apple. Shares hitting a record, at one point overtaking Microsoft during the week as the world's largest market cap company. The two companies are pretty much neck and neck now. Investors pumped up after Apple's annual Worldwide Developers Conference and Great AI reveal, now known as Apple Intelligence.
For intel on Apple, we turn to our in-house go-to, Bloomberg News Chief Technology Correspondent, Mark Gurman.
They rolled out a bunch of new AI features with a privacy stance, with deep integration into their applications. They didn't bring anything new to the party, but the most important part is they showed up to the party, I guess. And it took investors in Wall Street some time to realize that Apple is now here. With or without something new, they've arrived. It was a year and a half Herculean effort to get Apple Intelligence to market. They had all these AI features under development, but no synthesized, no integrated package. So it took a while to put it all together. And they did that. And it's not going to sell new iPhones, I believe. It may spur a small number of upgrades, but more importantly, it's going to lock people into the ecosystem. They're going to keep their existing user base, and they're not going to lose people away to Android and other AI-driven platforms because they did this.
I do want to ask you, though, about the partnership with OpenAI, right? The formal announcement, we got that. How important is that? And is it any different from OpenAI's other partnerships that are out there? And is it always different because it's just Apple doing it?
Oh, the OpenAI partnership with Apple is incredibly different. So let me give you some perspective here. So Microsoft, they rolled out a ton of AI features on their computers and their other operating systems. The underlying large language models and underlying technology that they're using for nearly all of their features is powered by OpenAI. Apple's feature set, 90% of it is powered by Apple large language models, underlying Apple technology, Apple servers, etc. Only the chatbot portion, primarily, and some of the writing assistance tools, those are powered by OpenAI large language models and ChatGPT. So the OpenAI portion of the overall Apple Intelligence story is actually only a very small sliver.
All right, we always talk about the importance of the Chinese market to Apple. Is there something here in terms of what we're hearing from this event and that kind of moves the needle potentially in their sales over in China?
Yes, good question. This is a point that, quite frankly, I should have made earlier. Nothing. Apple Intelligence, at least the first iteration, is only available in U.S. English. Yes, in U.S. English. So there's going to be a long ramp up here until they're able to get it in other languages. Now, I would have to imagine that getting Apple Intelligence to work properly outside of the U.S., outside of just U.S. English, is going to be very high priority for next year. And so I would anticipate China next year. It's a priority. So I would imagine the AI story for China is going to get buttoned up sooner than later.
Is it integrated at the OS level? And you can probably guess why I'm asking this, Mark, because I
can guess why you're asking. Let me say a few things about that.
Okay, good. Because, I want to introduce it because I don't think everybody is totally caught up on this. Elon Musk said he would ban Apple devices from his companies if OpenAI's AI software is integrated at the operating system level. He called the tie-up a security risk. Okay, go ahead, please.
Something integrated at the OS level, that is a vague term that can be interpreted in many different ways. So it's not entirely clear what he means by that. If you ask me, OpenAI is indeed integrated at the OS level. And I'm sure Apple would agree, but I'm sure there's some other people who would say that it's not integrated at the OS level. It's built into Siri. It's built into the OS. It's a chatbot. It's not just an application. It's not just a layer on top. It is fairly integrated into the operating system. So I would say, yes, it is integrated. But just because it's integrated at the OS level doesn't mean there aren't parameters and what's known as sandboxing implemented into the coding infrastructure that can separate what goes into ChatGPT from the deeper core of the iOS foundation. Right. And so the burden of proof is on Apple and OpenAI to show how privacy-centric the ChatGPT elements are of Apple Intelligence. Apple did a 15 out of 10 job showing how private and secure their artificial intelligence technology is for the phone. That's the Apple LLM, how secure their compute cloud is for the LLM that runs in iCloud. They did an amazing job on that. What we didn't hear a lot about is the privacy protections that OpenAI are implementing. From some standpoints, you can say it's just, trust us. Maybe Apple could say a little bit more there. Either way, I think that Elon Musk is competing with Apple and OpenAI here. He has Grok from XAI. He has a terrible interpretation of Apple and feeling towards Apple and their App Store rules and the fees they take from subscriptions on their platform. He clearly does not like Sam Altman, right? He's embroiled in all sorts of things regarding Sam Altman and OpenAI.
He was a co-founder of OpenAI.
He was a co-founder back in the day of OpenAI. They had a falling out. So his perspective isn't exactly kosher on this situation. But he raises real privacy questions regardless. I just think he's way overboard on it.
Okay, that said, Mark, how realistic is it that he could ban these devices at his companies, given that they're ubiquitous? And I can't imagine employees, putting them in some sort of box or leaving them in their cars. They walk into work at SpaceX or the Boring Company or Tesla.
It's a top 10 most ridiculous Elon Musk tweet. Right. Okay. That's not going to happen. I mean, imagine showing up to work and all of a sudden, you can't bring your Apple devices in. You have to leave your iPhone in a Faraday cage outside the office or leave it in your car. That's just not going to happen. Right. He's already laid off thousands of people from his company or tens of thousands of people from his company. I'm not sure he can afford to have people quitting in large numbers at this point. But I think that's going to upset a lot of people.
That was Bloomberg News chief technology correspondent Mark Gurman. By the way, speaking of Elon Musk and AI, Elon dropping a lawsuit alleging that OpenAI and its CEO Sam Altman breached a founding promise last year by prioritizing profits over humanity without saying why. More Elon news, including about his massive $56 billion pay package. Just head on over to Bloomberg.com.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Business Week podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business App. Or watch us live on YouTube.
Bill Clinton and China entering the WTO, the rise of globalization, McKinsey and the lean Taliban, the decline of unions and the working class, the rise of share buybacks and increasing dividends, and monopolistic takeovers, and then the pandemic and the great supply chain crisis.
Covering it all and this complex global system is New York Times global economics correspondent and award-winning journalist Peter S. Goodman. He's the author of the new book, just out, How the World Ran Out of Everything Inside the Global Supply Chain. And to understand the global supply chain, Peter visits seemingly every link of it. He spends time in one of the largest exporters of almonds in California and with the dock workers who are supposed to get those almonds all over the world. He hitches a ride through Kansas with a Brahms-loving trucker, feeds cows with a third-generation rancher in Montana, and eats breakfast with the commissioner of the Federal Maritime Commission. He visits ports from LA to Savannah to explain how the world found itself in the greatest supply chain crisis it's ever seen.
All right. He is here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. We wanted to do the setup because it's really comprehensive. And I do feel like I think it's safe to say that it explains a lot of kind of where we are today. So, Peter, you have had such a front row seat to so much that is going on in the world. Tell us about that front row seat and what kind of really, stands out for you.
It's changed the way I look at any package that lands at my door or really any product that somebody made somewhere that had to to be transported to a store or to a home or a business. We don't tend to think about the supply chain. You know, it's one of those things, it's like the light switch. We're not thinking about the internal wiring. We flip it on, the lights work. Well, when we needed it most, it failed. It buckled, and we had frontline medical workers dealing with COVID patients without protective gear. We had families unable to find infant formula. I mean, that was an incredible crisis. We had the toilet paper scare, which turned out to not be so much a shortage as a question of hoarding. And we all remember these ships, 50, 60, 70 ships that were floating off the coast of Southern California, unable to land, floating for weeks at a time before they could find a slot to load and unload all these factory goods coming in from China. And I think for all of us in the midst of the pandemic, it was so bewildering that it gave us this curiosity about these people we never think about. So yes, as you guys pointed out, I climbed into the front of a truck. I visited with rail maintenance workers who were away from their families for weeks at a time, and I really tried to understand what has gone haywire here.
Peter, the reason we're talking about such a complex supply chain is because of globalization. Your career has kind of coincided with the rise of globalization.
Right.
Being a reporter in South Asia in the 90s and then post.com crash, working for the Washington Post, I think it was out of Shanghai.
That's right.
You visited a lot of these factories at times when they weren't what they are today. Talk a little bit about how you've seen your career alongside the rise of globalization.
Yeah, I appreciate you pointing that out. So I landed in China in 2001, which was the same year that China, of course, enters the World Trade Organization, this landmark, moment for globalization. And it was pretty clear then that China had huge aspirations and that the world was flocking to China in large part because, corporate CEOs who were constantly looking for ways to cut costs availed themselves of this ultimate opportunity to engage Chinese labor as a way of undercutting labor costs at home in the US, in Japan, in South Korea, in Europe. And it was also clear that the Chinese government had very systematically built out the infrastructure that was needed for trade. So, I visited massive ports, factories that were capable of making, enough microwave ovens to supply Walmart for a year, and whole towns were set up for single industries. I remember going to the necktie town. There was this one town in one province that was suddenly making more neckties than all of Italy, in the course of a decade. So you could feel that the scale was available. But what I didn't understand, and what I've come to understand through this book, is that all of this was premised on the idea that container shipping would be basically free and reliable. And what I've come to see is that we built this global economy, putting ourselves really at the mercy of this international cartel.
If you had to pinpoint, was it President Bill Clinton, former President Bill Clinton, and the push to get everybody or to get China in the WTO, that's why we're having this conversation? That's why when the pandemic hit, we were like, what the heck happened to our global supply chain? Is it that particular moment in time that got us to here?
I think that's a landmark. I mean, there's a lot of moments in time, right? I mean, I write about Ford because I was interested in the rise of mass assembly. I write about the roots of the shipping container because the process of standardizing cargo made it possible to go look for the cheapest place to make anything. You could go anywhere around the world.
But if China wasn't accepted on a global scale
right.
in terms of trade, right? There was a big push. There were lots of concerns about human rights. There are still lots
right.
of big concerns about human rights. And yet there they were, right, in the WTO, something they fought for.
Well, here's the part that people are generally afraid to talk about. China gets into the WTO because American retailers lobby like crazy to get China into the WTO, and nobody wants to be affiliated with this story of labor exploitation. Now, let's remember, Chinese labor in American history, from the beginning, it's about undercutting wages, right? Chinese workers are
right.
systematically brought over from China to build the railroads because the mostly Irish laborers say, this is pretty dangerous and we're not getting paid enough. So this is a continuation of that story, a century later, where now we're bringing the production to China, and there's is a sort of seamy, unsavory quality to this story because, of course, China is controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. There's no elections. You can get access to land. You can bypass workplace and environmental standards by cutting some local party official in on part of the spoils. Well, this is not a good story for Bill Clinton, who, only a decade before he lobbies to get China into the WTO, is running as the guy who's, disciplining George H.W. Bush for coddling the butchers of Beijing. He's very critical of the crackdown against the pro-democracy demonstrators in Tiananmen Square. Well, I tell this story in the book. It's not even a decade later, and Clinton's in Beijing at a banquet at the Great Hall of the People across the street from Tiananmen Square, where he literally picks up the baton and conducts the People's Liberation Army Orchestra as they play this John Philip Sousa March. Now, why is Bill Clinton there? He's there because his party, the Democratic Party, is pulling in massive campaign contributions from retailers, and they're fashioning this story. It's not totally a fairy tale, right? I mean, trade has been the linchpin of American foreign policy since the end of the Second World War, but there are a lot of reasons to be dubious that, this is really about, it's not just about selling Chinese people lots of stuff. It's not just about buying cheap goods from China. This is about democratizing China.
Well, that was the goal, the thinking that, okay, let's open up, trade and probably democracy will come and the human rights abuses will go away. And yet it didn't necessarily play out that way.
Well, one part of it played out. We got really low-cost goods from China. The Walton family, the founders of Walmart, for a while became, the wealthiest family on earth. And anybody who moved production over to China at scale and managed to do the right deals rewarded their shareholders handsomely. That part held to form. Also, not incidentally, the industrialization of China lifted several 100 million people out of poverty. And that's highly significant. But the part about once Chinese people get a taste of Kentucky Fried Chicken, they're going to demand the ballot box. Well, that has not worked out, as I think everyone is now aware. We're talking about genocide, according to the Biden administration, in Xinjiang, where the Uyghurs are pressed into forced labor to produce cotton that ends up in lots of apparel. Of course, we still don't have elections. The central government has actually strengthened its role in Chinese society. So we don't hear that talk anymore. And of course, now it's become politically fashionable within both parties to attack China as our enemy.
Peter, you mentioned concentration in shipping. I believe you called it a cartel.
Right.
I had no idea before reading this that it was basically, three companies?
Three alliances.
That control.
So there's a bunch of companies, but think of it like airline alliances.
Three alliances that control basically all of shipping.
95% of the shipping from China to the West Coast of the United States.
Some of the companies owned by China or are state-subsidized organizations. How did it become like that?
It became like that because there was deregulation pretty much everywhere, including in the U.S., where, there used to be this antitrust exemption, but there was regulation on shipping rates. So you had to post what your rates were from one place to another. You couldn't negotiate a deal in secret. It was all above board, sort of like a utility, right? Like the government's involved because this is a vital part of the economy. And then basically retailers lobbied. There were a couple of landmarks. The last one was in the 80s. There was no Amazon then, but there was Walmart, Target. The big retailers thought, well, if we're bringing over lots of these factory goods from China to the West Coast of the U.S., to the East Coast of the U.S., we would like to be able to negotiate a better deal than the smaller competitors. So essentially, we've optimized the supply chain for the biggest companies. And the antitrust was essentially deactivated throughout much of American life, right? You go back to Reagan, although really the story starts with Carter.
Right.
We're steeped in this idea that scale is the way to serve consumers, and so let's just get out of the way of business and let them provide. And, that will deliver innovation. But once you take away competition, of course, what we get is pricing power. And for a long time, these mostly, they're all actually foreign companies in international shipping. There were extensions of state policy in China, South Korea, Taiwan. So they were content to keep shipping costs low as a way to bolster their exports. But once we get a shock in the great supply chain disruption during the pandemic, we see shipping prices go up tenfold. And we see, you guys were alluding to the fact that I spent some time with almond farmers in Central California. We see almond farmers I visited had an entire crop sold to Dubai to Japanese purchasers, and they were just sitting on all this crop that they couldn't actually get on a ship because these shipping carriers were making so much money sending factory goods from China to the west coast of the U.S., which is the gateway for 40% of American imports, that they didn't even want to bother to send empty containers up to the Central Valley to load up with farm products like almonds. They just unloaded factory goods in LA and sent empty containers back across the Pacific. We're talking about burning diesel fuel to send air back across the Pacific so they can get $25,000, $27,000, $28,000 to move a container of factory goods from, a place like Shanghai to LA. That used to cost like $2,000, $2,500 during the pandemic. That's largely the story of deregulation.
One thing I think about, though, in particular, and in your book, is kind of the role of consultants here. And I don't want to pigpile on anyone in particular, but you do single out McKinsey.
I sure do.
You do talk about the lean Taliban. You also get into a lot of just-in-time inventory. For anybody who's taken accounting classes, like we've played around with this, right?
Right.
But this idea, too, that you don't want to have big inventories. You want to be lean and mean, right? So, because those inventories are costly to store them, to have them, and all that thing. And so this financial focus on that and this kind of narrative of saying, be lean and mean, that's a good thing. We've all played a part of it when we go through the quarterly. Lean and mean, this is a good thing for a company. How big a role did that play in getting us so that when the pandemic hit, nobody had excess supply anywhere?
A huge role. We cut inventories to the bone. Publicly traded companies cut inventories to the bone over decades. Now, just-in-time is a sensible idea. It was pioneered by Toyota. End of World War II, devastation, not a lot of capital, not a lot of land to develop. Taiichi Ono, who was running Toyota, pioneers this idea that instead of making as much stuff as possible, like Henry Ford did at Ford, and letting salespeople try to figure out how to sell it, let's just make enough to replenish the cars that we've already sold. Let's get our suppliers to deliver the stuff we need right when we need it, rather than waste capital on warehouses. Hey, that's a good idea. But along come publicly traded companies guided by consultants like McKinsey who say, listen, this should apply to everything, and you should not stop until there's basically no inventory. And what you do is, instead of wasting capital on sticking, auto parts in a warehouse as a hedge against trouble, just liquidate the warehouse, take the cash, give it to yourselves to reward yourselves, corporate executives, for being smart enough to hire McKinsey, give it to shareholders in the form of dividends and share buybacks, and everybody's happy until there's a problem. And this pandemic was not the first time we saw a shock to the system. I mean, I wrote my first supply chain story back in 1999. It was about an earthquake in Taiwan. And back then people said, oh, whoops, we've got computer chip shortages. Maybe we shouldn't concentrate all our industry here. Maybe we should have a little more diversification.
Did we learn our lesson with the computer chip industry?
We sure did not. I tell the story in the book of Henry Ford, who is a problematic figure in history, but knew a thing or two about supply chains and never wanted to be in a position where he could be pinched by a supplier, constrained. Would have been horrified to see what I saw 100 years later as I'm walking the catwalk at his signature River Rouge plant outside of Detroit, where they're making these beautiful F-150 pickup trucks, their most popular vehicle. They've got all the things they need except for the one thing that brings it to life, the computer chip. And I watched them park these cars in the shadow of Ford's corporate headquarters across the street from Henry Ford Elementary School. I mean, he would be spinning in his grave over this. We did not learn the lesson.
I think this is a part, and forgive me if I've got it wrong, but when I read it, Detroit had devolved into a poignant example of what happened when middle-class factory jobs were replaced by poverty-level positions at retailers, warehouses, and fast food chains. Next to the old Highland Park factory, now a forlorn brick shell, a shopping center called Model T Plaza was anchored by a dollar store, a payday lender, and a plasma collection center awaiting people willing to swap blood for cash. The car itself had become an instrument of white flight. Like, that to me says so much of what's going on across America and explains to me politics in a big way. Sure. And we want to bring in Doug Krisner's here. Doug is like this great thinker, and like your book just kind of reminds us of the things we talk about with Doug. So we wanted to bring him into it.
One of the things that's interesting, Tim was going to talk about politics. In the 1992 presidential campaign, Ross Perot was the lone voice who was kind of cautioning against, at that time, what was the North American Free Trade Agreement?
Right.
Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. What's stunning is how quickly the conversation became about China. Why did that pivot happen so quickly, in your view? Away from North America, manufacturing in China.
Well, China operates on a whole different scale than Mexico, right? So Ross Perot, of course, famously warns of the giant sucking sound. And we did lose some jobs in the industrial Midwest to Mexico, but we picked up a lot of jobs because the U.S. and Mexico are economically integrated. And I mean, it's ironic now to think about Mexico as the solution to some of our supply chain problems. But when we import something from Mexico, 40% of the value of that imported good was actually made in the United States. So, we bring in a car that was made in a Mexican factory, and 40% of the value of that car was built by American labor in American factories. The component number for China is 3%. So only 3% of the value of imports from China have American value add. And of course, Chinese state policy is really directed at driving that as close to zero as possible. But I think it's really important to note that a lot of these failures that have fueled the backlash, originally Mexico, now China, I argue in the book, I mean, this is part nobody really wants to talk about, these are homemade failures. I mean, we have benefited from trade with China. We have benefited from trade with Mexico. We've got a lot of low-cost goods. In the case of Mexico, again, we've boosted our exports. We've got consumers benefiting. A lot of data shows that consumer spending has been juiced by trade with China, and that money ends up, in the hands of American service providers. Our leisure, is more robust. We have more money here. The problem is we haven't cushioned the people who have lost. And we have seen whole communities, industries, really hit hard by this China shock that a lot of the data shows we're talking 1 million direct jobs in the space of a decade lost to Chinese imports.
But is China the bad guy, or is it investors and companies who constantly were seeking out the low-cost provider?
The ultimate winners are the investor class, without any question. And there's a lot of labor exploitation in China. So, yes, the winners are the people who funded the Clinton campaign and got Bill Clinton to get us to
say
China.
Nothing of environmental regulation.
Of course.
Okay.
Right.
Go ahead, Tim.
Peter, I want to talk about labor exploitation in the trucking industry.
Sure.
Because a common thing that we heard over and over again during the pandemic and the supply chain disruption that we saw was that trucking companies just didn't have enough drivers. They needed people to go learn how to drive a truck and start driving trucks. You found that wasn't the case. It's just a really, really bad job.
It's a horrible job. I mean, I rode with a trucker in the best possible conditions. A guy who actually likes his job, from Kansas City to Dallas and back in the middle of the winter. I slept in the cab for 2 nights. I watched this man have to worry about caffeinating enough so he wouldn't fall asleep at the wheel, and yet not having to pull over to use the restroom. Truckers are constantly worried about where they're going to park. They're at the mercy of lots of other parts of the supply chain they have no influence over. They can get stuck at warehouses for hours waiting for somebody to load or unload their vehicle because warehouses have shortages of workers. Now, this trucking industry shortage, this is an industry talking point. There's 10 million people in the United States who have licenses to drive long-haul trucks, and we need roughly a third that number. We've run out of people we can feed into the mill who are willing to sign off on these predatory lending arrangements by which truckers pay for their certification, by which they end up buying these vehicles at wildly inflated prices from the trucking companies. Then they're forced to go service these vehicles at places that are, part of the empires of these trucking companies. And so a lot of people, they get tired of being away from their families. Mm-hmm. They get tired of hearing that they've missed another child's birthday party. They miss people's funerals. It's a tough job. It's always been a tough job. The difference is it's been downgraded to the point that we've run out of takers for this tough job.
What's the remedy in your view? I mean, how do we get out of the situation that we're in now? I'm listening to the trucking story, and I'm thinking of robotic vehicles that are going to be creeping into the scene pretty soon. So the argument that you're making right now may get a remedy, but it's going to be at the cost of labor in a major way. But what do you think the remedy is longer term?
I mean, I think for openers, we got to look at these predatory arrangements that truckers make with the people coming through these educational mills that set up certification with taxpayer funding. We are paying to feed people into these training programs where they end up getting jobs that pay a fraction of what they've been promised. So that's the first thing to do. Look, automation's inevitable. It's going to happen. But we got to have a conversation about how we compensate the people who are still in the business. We got to make sure that they can get exercise, that they can eat better than they're eating. I mean, the food that you see at these truck stops, it's a tough life. The government has to get involved in looking at these working conditions.
What's the bigger solution, though? Because to me, I'm thinking, all right, if we're bringing a lot of stuff home, maybe more jobs are going to be created back home, but it's going to be more expensive. So get ready to continue to pay more money. But if it means that workers are actually making more and a real living, that's a good thing. So I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out what you see as the way forward. In some
cases, if we shift production from China to other countries where wages are higher, if we bring some of it back to the U.S., that'll mostly be automation. Yeah, the cost for some things are going to go up. Some things may go down, some things may go up. But what is the cost that we're paying now that doesn't get factored into the simple, sticker price at the Walmart superstore? What's the cost of running out of medical devices in the middle of a pandemic? What's the cost of discovering that we've depended upon a single country that we've decided is our adversary, that we're having a trade war with for, personal protective gear to give frontline medical workers?
And none of that's really changed, right, dramatically? Or has it?
It's changed somewhat. I mean, I spent a lot of time for the book, I went to Guatemala with Columbia Sportswear. They're looking to move production closer to their biggest market, which is North America. Spent a lot of time in Mexico looking, as we discussed, how that could potentially be part of the solution to our excessive reliance on China. But China's going to be the center of manufacturing for a really long time for the simple reason that it's got this unbeatable combination of infrastructure, low cost, efficiency. The question is, how do we compensate the people who we're depending on in our own country? And Henry Ford, again, problematic character for all sorts of reasons, but he got some things right. He doubled wages for his workers in the 19-teens. He was called a communist by some people. He said, look, I'm just trying to sell cars and I'm trying to sell them at low prices. And any business that's built on low wage labor is unreliable.
Away from the government, is there a role for organized labor in this?
Oh, 100%. I mean, we should be embracing labor mobilization. I mean, it's bumpy. It does involve higher costs. If you're running a business, you're not delighted that your union is now animated. But first of all, it puts spending capacity in people's pockets, right? It boosts consumer power, which is good for all businesses. And it's simply more reliable if people are at work, not worried about their ability to put groceries on there.
I was thinking about that when I read about precision scheduled railroading in your book, because those were union guys, right?
Right.
But they had a pretty tough gig, too.
Some of them are union guys.
So you wrote about people who missed medical appointments and funerals and were driving so far from their homes in that business. Were the unionized folks who were doing that in a much better position than the non-unionized ones? I mean, because that's a tough gig, too.
Look, the unions were ready to go on strike and couldn't go on strike because there's this law that says they have to basically get the president's permission to strike, and the president didn't grant that permission because it would have been a shock to the system. It would have upped inflation, and that wasn't something that Joe Biden wanted to happen on his watch. But even, this powerful union that got right to the edge of strike, they couldn't get paid sick leave. Biden gave it to them through the bully pulpit, and some of the companies then delivered a few days. But yes, I talked to people who were missing out on, in one case, a guy whose infant, needed cardiac surgery, and he was told, "Sorry, pal, we need you on the maintenance crew. You can't be home for that." And he finally quit and fired off a letter. Yeah, go ahead.
No, but so much for was it a few years ago, the Business Roundtable stakeholder, think of all the stakeholders, including employees.
That's my last book.
We only have, I know, 20 seconds left. Are we going to run out of things again at some point?
Yes. Talk to contractors about why they can't build more housing. It's part of why housing is so unaffordable.
This was so much fun. So appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank
Peter
you,
Goodman,
guys.
global economic correspondent at New York Times, his new book, How the World Ran Out of Everything. And then, thanks to our Doug Krisner, too. We really appreciate you coming in.
Nice meeting you.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Businessweek podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 2 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business App. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, "Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130."
Plenty ahead in our second hour of the weekend edition of Bloomberg Businessweek, including a check on the New York City luxury real estate market. And Tim, if you could believe it, most wealthy buyers, they're paying for their new properties in cash.
Yeah, I believe it.
I bet you do.
I mean, maybe it's no surprise considering that most feel mortgage rates are still too high. Okay, so if a new condo, maybe not in your sights, how about taking to the skies in your own private jet? Carol, what do you think?
Count me in.
Okay. The founder and president of Par Avion stops by for a look at the private aviation market.
You know what they say, it's not the purchase, it's the upkeep. That's really
totally
troubling. All right, also so excited. Bloomberg food editor Kate Crater on this year's best restaurants in the U.S. and around the world, and tuna fishing in the Hamptons.
Oh, yeah.
It's apparently a thing.
It's pretty cool.
It's a story that apparently everyone keeps talking to her about, so we're going to get into it a little bit later on.
First up this hour, every June 19th, now celebrated in the United States as Juneteenth. It's a day to commemorate the ending of slavery in the country. And despite it being celebrated as early as 1866 by freed slaves, it became a federal holiday just 3 years ago.
The holiday helps shine a light on ways to address barriers experienced by underserved businesses, neighborhoods, and people. One big barrier often, banking and the financial services sector. On that, we talked with Kevin Cohey. He's chairman and CEO of One United Bank, the nation's largest black-owned bank with assets of more than $650 million, and who is, safe to say, very, very positive on the outlook.
There's never been the economic opportunity that exists today. Take one thing, artificial intelligence. That's going to change. That's going to change the world as we know it. It's going to change how businesses operate, create new opportunities for businesses that we never have had before. I believe sitting around worrying about small things that always exist. If you've been around at all, you've seen economic cycles with interest rates up, interest rates down. Look, okay, those are just small things that need to be managed. But what you can't do is lose sight of where we are and the gigantic core opportunity that we face as a country. Come on, we have artificial intelligence, okay?
Well, because you have guys have rolled out, right, AI tools and so on and so forth to help certainly your client base, and I get it in terms of the ability. I guess what we're trying to, we are so privileged here to sit here and have leaders like yourself come in, and I guess we always try to figure out when we are in environments where, and we're going to go back to something like interest rates. Like last year, we thought there were going to be a ton of cuts, and then we've kind of totally rethought like our thinking around that, and what are the implications for investment decisions, what it costs to buy a home. We keep talking about like the American dream for so many Americans being not available because it's so expensive. So I guess you seem like you would be an optimistic person a lot, but you're optimistic. So is there any, are all American consumers that you guys have a vantage point on and businesses doing really well?
Yes, you have low unemployment just as a starting point. Things like buying homes, there's the affordability issue, but access to capital is at an all-time high.
Interesting.
I see in terms of looking at certainly Black-owned financial institutions, they've never been more prosperous. They never had so much capital. They've never had so much opportunity. They've never had the kind of opportunity we have to partner with corporate America. I got like JP Morgan is my partner. Okay, they just think about the implications of that, of having a company of that magnitude who's focused and really seriously from Jamie Dimon. I came here to meet with Jamie Dimon, who actually will sit down with you and talk about how you're doing and what kind of things the JP Morgan can do to help you as a company to grow and prosper. We've never had that kind of opportunity. This post-technology driven, post-George Floyd environment.
It's dramatically different.
Dramatically.
Why do you think people are so pessimistic then? And we've talked about this on the program lately, but there was a Harris poll a few weeks ago that they teamed up with The Guardian, and they found that nearly 3 in 5 Americans believe the U.S. is in an economic recession, even though we're not. 49% believe the S&P 500 is down for the year.
It's not.
Even though it's up more than 10%. You are optimistic. You are feeling prosperous. You say your customers are too. What are people getting wrong here?
I think it's just part of the human condition is want to talk about your challenges you face. I couldn't say it any better than you just said it, okay? If you look at the actual facts, okay, I'm talking about what's actually happening.
Yeah.
And so if you look at where we are from a from a factual standpoint, it's clear that we've never had this opportunity that we have today. And I think the most important thing is for everyone to get focused on what's important, to take advantage of what's in front of you now, the opportunities that technology has brought to us to be able to deliver products on a worldwide basis. Okay, One United Bank is in a position where our products now, people are saying, have worldwide implications.
Yeah.
Now think about that with a company from an urban community that can create a product that not only has national implications, but has worldwide implications. We're in a position to create technology that allows you to not only participate in local economies, but regional, national, and international opportunities. We never had this before.
Yeah, it's a game changer. It's dramatically different.
Absolute game changer.
I feel like I want to go back for a second, because whenever we bring up Jamie Dimon, or whenever he's in a story or makes comments, it's always among our most read stories. So you talk about, conversations with Jamie and meeting with Jamie, what is it that you like to talk to him about, and how you even continue kind of the work that you guys are already doing?
He's a financial genius, okay, that's in a position and cares about people, and certainly cares about MDI, what they call Minority Depository Institution, and is willing to use his organization to support the growth and prosperity of this critical component of society. I mean, nobody's been doing that. I've been doing this long enough that I've seen what is real and what's not real in terms of corporate America's willingness to support the growth of other companies. It's never been higher than it is today.
Is Jamie Dimon the exception, or are you seeing it much more across companies in the financial industry?
Honestly, he's just the best. They are the best program, but they're not it's not the only program.
Yeah.
Citibank's program is a beast. Okay, that's another Jane Fraser and what she's done with that company, and the opportunities they create for MDIs is unprecedented. Taking the time to bring their top people together with MDIs so we can learn from them and understand what kind of products and services that you can offer that we've never been offered before. Mm-hmm. They care about what's going on, and are devoting the resources of their organizations to helping develop minority communities. You have those large corporations actually caring about what's happening in the minority communities across the country.
Just explain to listeners and viewers right now who might think that, wait a second, wouldn't One United be a competitor to JP Morgan or to Citi? 30 seconds, explain why not.
We have different products that we serve. One United Bank deals with people. We deal with people problems. You're driving to work. Your truck's broke. It's going to cost $600. You don't have $600. You need to borrow. You need an emergency, small balance, short-term loan in order to solve your problem. That's a One United Bank product. You can't get a checking account because there's some problem that occurred in your youth. That's a One United Bank product. We have different products and serve different types of customers.
We're going to get to Juneteenth in just a minute, but I just want you to explain the asset light or the branch light model approach to banking, because I think people would be familiar with, you have some branches in some states, but you also have a huge digital presence, and that's mostly where the growth
Massive,
is.
actually,
Massive,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, okay, we're in a world where now the way people expect to receive their financial services, they expect it to be with them at all times. That those things, those cell phone things, people are expecting to have access to banking services 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and to be able to spend money all around the world. They're not going to drive down the street and around the block and stand in line no matter how good your donuts are. So one is just pure convenience. So we're shifting from this community banking model where you had these branches and people would go in them and know the tellers and all that, to this technology-driven model where their expectations are much higher. In the two ways, the convenience of getting access to the services, but also the products in themselves. You're talking, banks are moving from an environment where you had what they call utilitarian products. That's what a checking or a savings account is. It allows you to perform some kind of function. But when you look at products like Wise One, technology-driven products, they actually help you to make money. You understand the difference? Something that facilitates you spending money versus something that's actually giving you information that's going to make you more money. So this is a whole new generation of banking products that service unique needs that are outside the banking system. Here again, banks, I've never been nothing but a banker my whole life, so it's within that context. But banks serve very different needs. Okay, a bank is a corporation that exists to make as much money as it can. Now, however, where that leaves this whole area of the problems and challenges people have,
right,
and what people's needs are. And technology allows you to create products to service the people's needs.
What would you say, though, the importance of, we've kind of really increasingly gotten away from the community bank that understands the community, right? Because a banker from up high might not understand a community and its needs specifically, and something that from up high might look like a risk. If you understand the community, you would say, not so much. So do we lose something, though?
Well, that's the beauty of technology.
You say no, we don't?
It's not even close. Okay, what data can do, what actual data can do, as opposed to what you might think, what your hunches and intuition that you have about things. The world is advanced from that. Like, I think I understand the need of this person to being able to actually understand the needs.
You would say the data would be more inclusive.
I'm saying the data is more important, that we shouldn't rely on hunches and intuition in making decisions. That's what creates a lot of the problems. That's where biases come. That's where bias come from, because people think they understand things that they actually don't understand. If you think you understand it, the data will tell you the real answer. And so once again, as an advancement in our ability to make decisions, for One United, that's one of the big things we do. We rely on the actual data related to an individual to make the determination of whether we can issue credit about them or not some intuition about what we think about some broad-based community.
That doesn't include a credit score, or it does include a credit score?
Not in our case. We use much deeper information than credit scores. Credit scores is once again, it's dated technology.
Yeah.
I hate to put it like that, but you have their credit models that you can use, that companies like us use, that allow you to be able to evaluate people that aren't in your immediate physical proximity, that you can do business with people on a nationwide basis, because you have the foundation for being able to understand that individual and their performance quickly. And to be able to issue credit, as an example, on a nationwide basis, as opposed to only being around the corner because you think you know how a particular group performs.
That's an interesting way of thinking of it, because we've talked so much about the biasness in data. So it's interesting to hear you say that it's a better, potentially a better take at it. We've got about 3 minutes left, and we have had a great conversation off air with you of talking about Juneteenth, the day, as you said, we're coming up on our second year or so, third year of recognizing it. But the point is that a lot of people don't even know what it's still about.
Exactly. That's the most important thing, is to realize Juneteenth is a federal holiday. It's not a black people holiday. It's a celebration for it's celebrating one of the best decisions that America ever made, which was to free the slaves. That helps all of us to move forward. It gives us a massive social dividend, if you will, because slavery, an institution like that, hurts both the person who is a slave, but it also equally hurts the person who's enslaving the person. Nobody wants to live in a world where people are being cold-blooded and brutal towards other people. You can't have any position of leadership acting in that way. So that decision, that single decision to free the slaves, is yielding this massive social benefit, and it yields this massive economic benefit. Let's not forget, to end slavery, half our country had slavery as the backbone of its economy. Yeah. We had to recognize that we could get rid of that and create more economic value by getting rid of this institution that was so important at that time. And that's where we are. Of course, we've been slowed down because we went from slavery to Jim Crow. But now as we move away from Jim Crow and work on solving the last big piece of this, which is financial literacy, because if you look at what's happened to our society, we now bifurcate. Our society used to be bifurcated based on things like race and religion and that kind of stuff that we grew up with. It's now bifurcated based on the haves are the people who are financially literate, and the have-nots are the people who don't. So we have to work on this issue of making sure that all of our society is financially literate. Here again, let's not forget, we live in a society that forgot to teach financial literacy. So Kate.
So we only have about 40 seconds left here. We've talked about financial literacy. I feel like I've been doing this a long time. Tim's been doing this forever. How do we do it? How do we do it? And forgive us because we only have about 40 seconds.
Make financial literacy a mandatory requirement to graduate from high school. Just start with that. You have to take a significant course of study in order to graduate from high school, period. And what's so important about that is your whole life, with all due respect, you're going to solve very few chemistry problems, very few biology problems.
For me.
But you're going to be solving financial problems every single day. So that's the bare minimum we could do, is make it a mandatory requirement, and we have to get the corporations involved because we have to teach the teachers in order to be able to fulfill that mandate.
Amen. We're in. We totally agree. Come back again. We would love.
Please have me back. I would love the opportunity. I enjoyed hanging out with you guys.
We enjoyed having you hang with us. Kevin Cohey, Chairman and CEO of One United Bank, right here on Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Business Week podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business App. Or watch us live on YouTube.
Financial literacy is a crucial life skill and ever more so for disadvantaged adolescents. Tackling that, an organization that aims to invest in young people was founded about 25 years ago by Grammy Award-winning Usher.
Yes, that Usher is who we're talking about.
Yes,
and his mom, Janetta Patton. They created the Usher's New Look Foundation as a way to help teens from tough backgrounds achieve financial success. Bloomberg News cross-asset reporter Emily Grafeo and I spoke with President and CEO of UNL, Carisha Moore.
In 1999, Usher was thinking, how can I help young people get a new look on life? He and his mom, they actually sat in the courtroom of Judge Glenda Hatchett and observed a court proceeding, a juvenile proceeding. And they said, these young people, they're leaders. They just need mentors. They need some support. They need exposure. And so he created Usher's New Look to be able to provide that and give youth a new look on life through workforce development, but also exploring their spark, their passion. He found his passion early on and knew that changed his life. And so to be able to provide that to young people 25 years later is exactly what we're doing.
I want to share with people information about the program because I think it's unique in several ways. One is that it's a decade-long program, but also that it starts essentially when these kids are teenagers. So it starts relatively late. Take us through what exactly happens to these teenagers over that 10-year period.
Right. So from 14 to 24, our young people can participate in Usher's New Look. And we have standard-bearing comprehensive programming that starts with one-day training that we host in schools. And the unique thing about that is that it's peer-to-peer. So our post-secondary students are standing in front of their peers, 14-year-old, and teaching them about leadership, about business, about financial literacy and their spark. We also have an after-school program for high school students in Atlanta as well as in New York, where they do a deep dive into our 4 pillars: talent, education, career, and service. We believe those 4 pillars help to develop global passion-driven leaders. And then once those students graduate high school, which we have 100% high school graduation rate for students who participate, they go on to post-secondary. And we support them with transition into adulthood by teaching them executive functioning skills, but also connecting them with companies, internships, and learning about life skills that they need to be amazing citizens that they are.
It's interesting that you start in middle school. Can you talk a little bit about, at least for the youngest kids in the program, what are the top resources that they need right now?
The top resources that they need, and we just did a study actually last year with young people. What do you feel is the most prevalent issues facing you and your peers? And those top things that came out right now are mental health supports and strategies to help them cope with those things. As we know, we've come out of a global pandemic, and so that has changed a bit, but also learning about financial literacy and exposure to various careers. You know, if you can't see it, you can't be it, is what we say. And so being able to show them various careers where they can use their skills and talents is important as well.
Why is 14 to 24 the right age to focus on? I was talking with Elizabeth Sedrin, our producer, about this earlier. And the idea, there are a lot of nonprofits that focus on essentially college to cradle, right? The idea, or cradle to college, excuse me, the idea of starting very young and going to college age. Why focus on 14 to 24?
That's the age where they're starting to increase their future orientation. They're understanding their agency in developing the life that they want at that time. And so we're able to share and impart upon them the skills and strategies that they need to be successful.
Do you ever get any pushback from folks who say that's too late? We need programs earlier.
You know what? No, there are 42 million young people here in the United States. And so there are organizations that focus on younger, and we happen to focus on that 14 to 24. It's not a silver bullet. It's not that just 1 year, but we stay with them for the entire time, as you notice, 14 to 24.
It's intern season, Tim. I'm wondering.
I came in yesterday morning, it said welcome interns.
There's a lot of interns. There's a lot of kind of early career energy in the building right now.
Yes.
You know, what kind of resources are you giving to those older, I guess, students and early career people in the program? What exactly are they looking for?
Right. So we partner with various private and public sector entities to help do resume reviews for the students. They do mock interviews. They learn about different careers that are out there. They also learn about the internship process. You know, we don't want to assume that they know exactly how that works. And so we start teaching them from the time that they are in high school, 11th grade through college, what they need to do to be ready, but also providing them with the skills that they need, especially when you're talking about work of now and the work of the future. So we have a partnership right now with IBM, where our students are having access to IBM Skills Build so that they can learn more about artificial intelligence, but also career-ready skills so that they're ready to not just do the careers of the future, but also lead.
We're Bloomberg. We love numbers.
Yes.
You mentioned 100% graduation rate, which is just incredible for any program. I don't care what program we're talking about here, but 100% anything is amazing.
Right.
What are some other metrics that you use as kids get closer to aging out of the program? I can't call them kids, actually, as these young adults get closer to aging out of the program, that is a metric for success. Like, how do you know this is working?
Right. So we work very closely with evaluators. We have a logic model that focuses on our objectives. And what we're looking for is change in behaviors and attitudes. So we're looking to the fact that, do they have a physical resume? Are they ready to go to work? But also, do they have a changed thought about their impact and what they can do in their community, how they can lead in their community, as well as the skills that they have gained? Do they have a bank account? Do they understand what savings and personal budgeting means for them? And so those are some of the objectives that we have as well.
We talk about this all the time. These personal finance skills, this is not taught in school.
It's not. Right.
You only know about this stuff if you learn from family, friends, mentors.
That's right.
So you leave college or leave high school not knowing simple things that look simple to a lot of people, but are actually kind of tough to do on your own.
Exactly. And we find ourselves busting a lot of myths that they may have around credit, around saving, around just earning potential and those sorts of things. And what we find is that, again, through our evaluations, that financial literacy scores the highest on all of our training. It's what our young people say, I didn't know much about that at all. And now I know a lot, and I'm able to share that with my peers as well as my family. So you're right. I mean, we don't talk about it a lot. It's pretty taboo. But they're learning and they're able to go and share and be ambassadors with their community.
It's really empowering. And that's I'm wondering if you have any other examples of kind of a statistic like that, so we can end on a high note.
Absolutely. So when you talk about first generation college students, about 51% in the United States, and we are now at about 80% of our students, and getting them to go on to career. We end up with about 90% of our students going on to college.
Wow.
And so when you have 81% first gen and 90% of them are going to college and graduating within 5 years, that is something that we are very, very proud of.
It is a really cool program. Thank you so much for joining us during your visit to New York. That's
Thank you.
Carisha Moore, President and CEO of Usher's New Look. It is the now nonprofit that 25 years ago, the singer-songwriter, dancer, superstar Usher Raymond IV started with his own mom.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Business Week podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 2 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business App. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
You may have missed this last month. Luxury home prices in select Asian cities are soaring, bucking a downward trend in more established markets, including New York and London. And according to real estate consultancy Knight Frank, prime property prices, defined as the top 5% of the market, fell more than 2% in New York and London in the first quarter compared to the same period 1 year ago.
And that's been prompting wealthy buyers to pull the trigger when it comes to a new home. So let's get a check on the luxury market with Louise Phillips Forbes, real estate broker with Brown Harris Stevens here in New York City. She's been in the business for, more than 3 decades, and she's sold more than $5.5 billion worth of real estate, specializing in luxury residential sales and development projects.
I think individuals that a month ago, they might have pulled the trigger, that they're still contemplating, because I think, remember, at the end of the year, we were expecting 5 rate reductions.
Right.
And we haven't seen really any of those. In fact, we've had conversations about it coming up. So for some of those people, it means holding off. However, what's right for one person is not always right for another.
What's surprising for me to hear from you about this quarter is this is supposed to be the busy time of year. I mean, spring ahead of summer, and you had a great first quarter.
I had a record. I mean, almost 100 million in sales.
But that's supposed to be a quiet time, right?
No, not necessarily. The cycles are off because of COVID. Number
Really?
one. Number two, you have to realize that people have been holding off what decisions that they make since 2019 for many people.
So is that why people finally pulled the trigger?
Yes, and I think
quarter?
I believe psychologically I think that people believed that the interest rates were going to follow.
How many of your buyers are buying with a mortgage versus cash?
Very few right now. Okay. Ironically, of the 32 transactions, so the average deal is
from
not
the first quarter.
Mm-hmm, the average deal is not 38 million. The average deal is 3, 6, 5, 2. 600,000.
With mortgages or mostly cash?
All cash. Okay. All but 7.
All 7 of your first quarter deals?
So 63% across my business was a little higher, but across the market was 63 in the first quarter.
So
percent.
Why did they pull the trigger then? Is it just that they were, so for them, the rate environment wasn't so much
cash is always king. It is always king. And it also, you got to remember, some of these sellers have been waiting for 9 months, 12 months.
But that's what I'm saying. So it's not like, okay, they thought maybe it had nothing to do with the rate environment or anything. They were just, it held off.
It's a negotiating tactic. My experience is that if I have 3 offers on a piece of property and one's a mortgage, and I'm able to push the cash person or even choose to take less because they're cash.
So it was seller driven.
It's them having a choice was very powerful and important and new.
Yeah.
They hadn't experienced that in a while.
Can you talk about, I think this is unique to New York because there are so many cash deals, but can you talk a little bit about why a cash deal is so much more appealing to you than a deal with financing that could come in at a higher price?
Have you not seen the reality shows where they're like, it's a cash deal, it's even lower, but
and you're closing next Tuesday.
And they're closing next Tuesday. Done. Like, it's fascinating.
Yes. And you have like 11-inch heels on while you're doing it.
I know. And they look perfect. I know. It's like a little unreal, but anyway.
So, no, listen, the preference becomes about cleanliness, meaning, you go to contract and then you don't have an appraisal. How would you feel if you had 5 bids on a piece of property? Which, by the way, this happened all through the new year for myself.
Right.
And then it doesn't appraise. You have no contingency, but how do you feel as a buyer? Mm-hmm. How does a seller feel? Mm-hmm. Does somebody walk? So it's just cleaner if you have the luxury of that choice. Otherwise, it's our job to be able to make things appraise.
How do you then, in your world, where you're dealing, obviously, where some people who are listening are being like, I'm going to throw up because it's like $5-6 million all cash. Like, it's not a slice of total American life. it is a slice,
Right.
a small slice. Having said that, what does it tell you about the broader economic environment in a world where we, Louise, have so many conflicting data points?
Yes, and I don't think that's going to change for a while, Carol.
Okay.
I mean, listen, just remember that when interest rates are high, the rental market is high.
That's true.
Have somebody relocating here who got into the New York Academy of Arts, and they are relocating here, and we were looking for $9,000 rental, 2-bedroom. The same apartment 2 years ago went for $5,800, and it came on for $7,900, and it went for $83 in 2 days. So
we're talking a rental
that
here.
is a 47% increase in 2 years because the cost of money is more expensive.
Yeah.
And that
So buying is
so when
tougher.
interest rates are up, buyers they get on the sidelines and they rent, and they are affected. So
you're saying that people who are not buying are driving up the rental market?
Yes.
But you're also saying
absolutely.
it's a tougher environment and says something more broadly macro, right?
I'm talking about for the lower end of the market.
Yeah.
Right? So I have somebody who's contemplating selling a townhouse for $6.5 million, and they're like, the cost of my capital, I can rent something for $15,000. When he goes to look at what you can pay for $15,000, he's like, I'm going to wait a year.
Huh.
So
wait to sell.
Yes.
Okay.
Because
interesting.
It's sometimes some of this is a luxury.
Yeah.
It is a luxury. And again, I ask the same question whether it's a $20 million buyer or a $600,000 buyer. Do you want to pay your own mortgage, or do you want to pay somebody else's mortgage? Because that's what it is. I do think that you can try to time everything, but it's really about understanding I have people that are borrowing money from their grandmother who is going to inherit 92 years old, and he's like, I'd love to be able to use it while you're alive. And that is what they did. So people are getting creative, and it is what my recommendation is whether you're borrowing from your sister, you're co-owning with your parents. I'm thinking about, I have a son that's going to be 21 years old who's looking at real estate every day. Like, I want to buy my own apartment. He wants to buy an apartment where he can have a roommate. He doesn't think he can afford to live by himself.
Yeah. One last question. Does what goes on in office, does it matter? Does it impact you at all in terms of certain neighborhoods, or not really?
It certainly skews there are more cynics that are in that field. I mean, a lot of my business are commercial brokers that I do business with, meaning helping them personally with their homes.
Yeah.
And, they're
feeling squeezed.
They're like, oh my God, how are you holding up, Weez? And I'm like, okay, I don't even want to tell them. So,
because they are feeling so squeezed.
Yes. I mean, the New York Times, there's a building on Times Square that just had a short sale, like, I don't know, was it 62%?
Yeah.
This is the way that commercial market works, and the way lending works, and the way that they use the leverage. That is the science of that business. And that is always going to find cycles. It's going to have cycles, whether it's 15 years or 7 years or 4 years.
That was Louise Phillips Forbes, real estate broker with Brown Harris Stevens. Following our conversation, a report from the appraiser Miller Samuel, noting Manhattan apartment rents unexpectedly slipped in May. A sideways move for the market at the start of one of its typically busiest seasons.
And Tim, speaking of seasons and cycles, we've seen private jet ownership go through a few out of the pandemic, a surge during the crisis followed by receding pandemic-driven demand. So for what's happening right now, we turn to an industry veteran with over 35 years of aircraft sales experience. Janine Iannarelli is the president and CEO of Par Avion.
The business jet market does not like surprises. It does not like instability. It doesn't like anything to upset the apple cart. And it does happen every 4 years regardless. I wish I could tell you why. It's just that I can tell you that the people in the trade plan for it.
So how is it manifesting in your business right now?
Oh, it's much slower than it was 2 years ago. And even in comparison to last year, I can see that the buyers are being much more cautious before they actually open their purses. They're spending a great deal of time reviewing the asset, and sometimes they get really close and then they back themselves up, and we just have to wait them out.
I don't understand, because we, fairly regularly talk about the wealthy are getting wealthy. And I'm not just talking about billionaires, but I'm just talking about in general. And so I'm trying to understand. Remind us who, Janine, in general, is your typical buyer.
The classic buyer is an entrepreneur, self-made. They've built their business. They've sold their business. They're independently wealthy. That's the big bulk of my personal business. A portion of that is also corporate. Now, corporate's perhaps a bit more consistent because they look to turn their aircraft over every 5 to 7 years because they want to have warranty coverage for the aircraft. They don't want any surprises either. But that comes more from the operational side.
And is it American buyers or global buyers? Like, I'd love any kind of geographic color you can give us.
Well, this is, I would say, more specific to the United States. I mean, we're the largest marketplace in the world for business aircraft. And the drivers for why people acquire aircraft here are a little bit different than the rest of the world. We also are one of the most friendly environments for operating aircraft privately. And one of the big reasons for that is the airspace, the available airspace, the ability to fly direct from point to point. The airspace is so tightly congested. Let's just take Europe, for example, or regulated, that you have to get a slot for arrivals and departures in most of the airport, particularly at very busy times of the year. It's a deterrent to operating your aircraft freely. And we are the essence of freedom here in the United States.
In terms of, you talked about the typical client you have, the entrepreneur, the person who sells their business, is self-made, is independently wealthy. What do they then go do with that aircraft? The question that I have is, are they 100% flying on it themselves, or are they leasing it out or chartering it to other folks when they're not using it?
So I think the perspective that most of the buyers today take is, what's the easiest way to place the aircraft into service and continue that service? And generally that would be a management company as opposed to an independent flight department. And when you're with a management company, there's usually the added benefit of saying, would you like to charter the airplane? And I would say that the vast majority of people who have aircraft under manage will certainly agree to also chartering.
Wow. Okay. So give us the price range for a small to mid-size versus the super heavies.
So the small, you're probably looking at 3 to 8 million, maybe a little bit more the newer the aircraft. The super mid-size, depending on the age of the airplane, anywhere from 7 to 15, 16, 17 million. And then the large jet category, again, age is a big influencer in terms of the price point, but let's talk about newer aircraft, newer being 15 years or newer, and we're probably 20 million and up.
That was Janine Iannarelli, President and CEO of Par Avion.
Still ahead on Bloomberg Business Week, what do a Thai restaurant in Portland, Oregon, a UK restaurant that grows its mushrooms in a closet, and a Spanish restaurant that sells seafood surrounded by dry ice all have in common? I want to go there. That's what they have in common.
I was going to say, I can name several things. I'm not going to give it all away. Also, why are Wall Street bros leaving the trading desk maybe a little early on Fridays and going out to the Hamptons for a little bit of tuna fishing?
Bloomberg Pursuits and our own Kate Crater. They're coming up next. This is Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Business Week podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 2 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business App. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
So we absolutely love talking food here on Bloomberg Business Week. And Tim loves eating food. He's often eating during our broadcast, which is why
it's a little secret.
I know. I always got to give out our secrets. Mm-hmm. This is why a batch of stories on the best places to eat in the U.S., in London, really around the globe, was something we definitely wanted to sink our teeth into. Literally wanted to sink our teeth into, to be fair.
And we have the perfect guest here in our studio to break it all down. She's usually based in London. Lucky for us, she's back in New York, so we can catch up with her in person. We welcome back Bloomberg Pursuits food editor Kate Crater.
Hi, you guys.
Hi. How are you?
I am so happy to see you. You guys are a sight for sore eyes. Oh. That's what I want to say.
Oh, well, we are so happy to see you. And you've been so busy in London, especially this time of year when we're getting best restaurant after best restaurant after best restaurant. And that's really where we want to start, because the one in the UK that was ranked as the best restaurant has some really unique qualities.
In fact, it does. It has something very significant happening in the dining room, which is that they grow mushrooms in a glass-walled cabinet, and then that's a dish that's featured on their menu. A restaurant called the Ledbury won Best Restaurant in the UK in the National Restaurant Awards that were just announced.
So is the idea here that these mushrooms can grow year-round? Is that why they're done on display, or is it all about just the patrons actually seeing where this food comes from? Is it a little bit of a novelty? What is it?
Yeah, it's a super novelty. I mean, it works on so many levels because, if you've been to a good New York City steakhouse, you can often see the steaks, these like giant hunks of meat, and right
hanging
there
in the locker, right?
Hanging in the locker. And so here they're like, no, let's put mushrooms front and center. And it's easy to grow. There's actually all these, like, come Christmas time, if you need like a fun gift to give somebody who's got a little DIY thing going on, there's all these like do-it-yourself mushroom kits, but they grow some really beautiful looking mushrooms, like these lion's manes, which look like they're from another planet. So it's kind of fun to feel like you really can't get more local than that, especially in the middle of London, where there's not always a lot of opportunity to grow a lot of produce. But look, you can grow mushrooms in a cabinet. Like you said, Tim, it's like a year-round thing. And then there's literally one of the dishes on the tasting menu is mushrooms from the cabinet. So you almost I feel like the next thing is that you just go pick them yourself, right?
All right, so if you don't like mushrooms, you'll still find something there to eat.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's not just that. Don't worry.
You know what struck me, though, Kate, that this was a restaurant that actually, during the pandemic, like it was a really hard time. It just reminds me that even like established places had a tough time.
It's such a smart thing to bring up, Carol, because this was a restaurant called the Ledbury, and it's been open for about 15 years. And so in 2020, when lockdown started in the UK, they announced that they weren't going to open, and it sort of they weren't going to reopen. And it did send shockwaves, not just through the UK, but around the world, because it's a really notable restaurant. So it was like a good success story when they reopened, and the fact that they have now jumped to the top of this best restaurant list for the UK is awesome news.
Do we have time for one more on London, just because Kate spent like the past few years there?
As much time as we want.
Tell us about Ayo Adeyemi, who was over at Akoko.
He's a really cool. That's a good story too, because Akoko is sort of an ambitious West African restaurant that's also tasting menu, and they were a couple years ago last year when Michelin announced their awards, Akoko was not given a star, and people freaked out. I can't remember his name, but somebody actually went on a podcast and ranted about the fact that Akoko wasn't on it. And so now the fact that Chef Ayo has been recognized as like upcoming chef just shows the rising star power that's happening with West African food in the UK. You don't see so much West African food here in the US, but it's definitely a force to be reckoned with now in London.
I do wonder with restaurant rankings, I think you get into it in one of your stories that we're going to talk about. But Kate, I feel like, with all the award ceremonies, there's been a lot of pressure to like, hey, people who are doing the judging, broaden out in terms of what you're looking at. And diversity is obviously an issue, but I do feel like there's a thread through some of your stories about that.
Well, I just want to say yay for Bloomberg, because about a year ago, or last fall anyway, we wrote a story about how there were only 6 Black Michelin-starred chefs around the world. Not just in the U.S., not just in Europe, around the world. And within months of that story happening, things started changing a little bit. And so this woman, the chef Joke Bakare, who has an awesome restaurant in London called Chisharoo, got a Michelin star soon after that. And then somebody in New York, I think, also got a Michelin star. So the number is slowly creeping up, but it's still like a shockingly low number. I think you can still count on 2 hands how many Michelin-starred chefs, restaurants run by Black chefs there are.
Okay, there are 100 on this list. Be honest with us. How many of these have you been able to eat at?
Is this the UK one?
Yeah, this is the UK one.
Well, let's first be clear, Tim. I'm mostly based in London, and 53 of them were in London, so yay, London. London dominated this list. I would say maybe 20.
That's
One
awesome.
thing that's cool about this list, and I think we get to talk about it in a minute, but these lists are all these three big restaurant lists, one worldwide, one US, and one UK, are the way they're voted on is different for each one, and some of them you feel like are more random, or like you're less able to say like, wow, this is the best restaurant. But the UK list is kind of great because they have about 300 people voting for it, and it really is sort of functions as a heat map of what's happening, where you would tell people to go, and maybe they're not all deserving of being on the top 100, but you want to go and have an opinion. Like, it's a good thing to go and say like, wow, I went here. I went to Ledbury. Is it the best restaurant? No, but I went and I have an opinion. I saw my mushrooms growing.
That's pretty cool. Can I just tell you, the first time I went to London, like, I wasn't impressed with the food. Like, this was years ago, and
you just got to go with Kate. Everywhere you go, you got to go with Kate.
It could have been my husband, who's not very experimental, and we did a lot of, like, I don't know, roasts and things. But like the last time I was, and I visited you with my daughter, like, I was just blown away by the amount of like the food that's there.
It's gotten really good, and this is probably subject for another conversation. But dollar for dollar, like if you have $100 to spend in London and New York, you'll eat better in London, I would say.
All right, if you can go anywhere in the world, let's talk about the best restaurant in the world. Can we talk about that? Barcelona.
Let's go. See, we have a lot to do, Carol.
We do.
Yeah, Disfrutar in Barcelona was voted the #1 restaurant. There were some people who watch these world's 50 best restaurant lists closely, it wasn't super surprising because last year it was #2, and this list, places just sort of creep up. It's sort of like, your turn. Okay, your turn. So if you were betting, so these awards took place in Vegas. So it's not like surprise? It was not surprise. The awards took place in Vegas, and if you were betting there, you wouldn't have gotten a big return.
Here's the problem in my life. I never know.
You have a charmed life.
I have a lot of problems.
Be careful.
I have a lot of problems.
You have a charmed life.
When it comes to restaurants, well, first of all, I never go out to dinner anymore. That's my first problem, which is fine. But the other one is that I'm not in the right circles to go to these restaurants before they're on the list, because once they're on the list, forget about it.
You know what? That's an excellent point. Atomix, the U.S. did not do so well on the world's best restaurant list. We only have 2 in the top 50, but one of them, a restaurant called Atomix, which is actually in New York. So if you get a chance to go, please do. It's it's a sensational Korean tasting menu restaurant, but after this list came out, reservations at Atomix started trending on social media. And I wish I could help you, Tim, but I don't know if I can help you.
It's like seeing Hamilton before it went to Broadway.
Precisely.
I have a friend who did that.
Right.
I have a friend who did that at the Public Theater. He's a legend.
Yeah. It's likewise, you would be a legend if you can get an Atomix right now.
All right. I want to ask you about the best restaurant in the United States. Is in Portland, Oregon.
It's called Langbaan, yeah. So this restaurant, this is like, so the news for the U.S. wasn't so good. The world's 50 best.
Yeah.
Yes. So this is like you said, it's very much restaurant award season, and in fact, the best restaurants for the U.K. were announced at 5:00 New York time on Monday, June day that was, and the James Beard Awards were announced 5 hours later. So it really
take that, London.
Yeah, exactly. That's already old news. So yeah, it's called Langbaan. I actually haven't been there, but it is by all accounts a really terrific Thai restaurant where they have, their vision of making Thai food. It will be unlike any Thai food you've ever had, inspired but homey, and it's putting a spotlight on a cuisine that people take for granted and think should only cost a certain amount of money. So it's really cool.
What's really cool about this list is it's regional also.
Yes.
So you can go to Washington, D.C., for example, to find one of the best restaurants, or at least one of the best emerging chefs. You can go to the Rocky Mountain area to find some really good restaurants too, at least according to this list. Talk about how it's broken down.
Yeah, they do. It is pretty great because for a long time it was really dominated by places that like a Thomas Keller, per se, in French Laundry, and they ran into some trouble in 2020. They've in the past couple years there's definitely been some shakeups at the James Beard Foundation, and in fact in 2020 they paused the awards not just because of the pandemic but because of allegations of bullying and harassment in kitchens, which you've probably heard some of those stories, but also because there was it was reported there were going to be no black chefs on the list, and they saw red flashing lights and were like, pause, we're putting pause on this. So now they make a big effort to be very, very inclusive. And among those things is looking all around the country, in like every corner of the country. So as you said, Tim, like you can go to the Rocky Mountains and find a chef. And so they award a best chef. They give each region, they count 10 regions across the country, and there's a best chef in each region.
I love that they do that, right? It kind of broadens out. I have to say, there was a name on this list, David Standridge at the Shipwright's Daughter in Mystic. My husband and I have been wanting to go because we don't know, we knew his girlfriend a little while ago. Like they were at, I don't know. So we've been like dying to go.
And they were like closer to home here. And then now he's out where you guys go in the summer.
Yeah, they were like, they were living above like a boating place. And anyway, so it's silly
that's
story.
Awesome.
But it was the name, I was like, wait, oh my God.
It's closer to home. Like it used to be the James Beard Awards awarded a best restaurant to New York City, just New York City. And since then they've brought it out to New York State. So this year, actually, the best chef is Charlie Mitchell at Clover Hill in Brooklyn. Yeah. But the fact that they make a point of looking outside. You
can go to Brooklyn.
Yeah.
See that?
Can I tell you?
What?
I used to live close to this, and because I'm not cool, never heard of it. I looked it up on the map when I saw where it was. Literally, like a 12-minute walk from my old apartment.
I'm pushing back on not cool, Tim. But,
thank you.
But look, there's still chances.
He is cool.
There's a lot of public transportation and taxis.
I know.
You know
what will make you cool?
Not a lot of ways to get reservations apart from buying them on the black market.
That's all.
That's a different thing.
That's a different conversation.
Yeah.
That's Bloomberg After Dark. Hey, what will make you cool is maybe fishing for tuna in the Hamptons.
Depends on who you want to have think you're cool.
Tell us about what's going out in the Hamptons.
So I am delighted. I'm delighted by this trend that's happening this summer, which is that the hot activity, especially for people who work on Wall Street, it seems, is to get on a blade jet or a helicopter, or however you get out to the Hamptons. Go out to Montauk, get on a boat and tuna fish, and then take your tuna to a local sushi chef and have them not cook your tuna, but slice it up for you and serve it. Take pictures and put it out there.
Okay, so a lot of stuff has happened in recent years, some good, some bad, that have made it so you don't have to spend all day on a charter vessel in order to go fishing.
I mean, yeah, that's actually the kind of great part about this, is that for a number of reasons, including that boats have gotten faster, and in fact, Starlink has made it easier to be connected. I think that started in 2022. It's made it easier to be connected even when you're out there. But also, tuna and some of those other big game fish are swimming closer to the shore than they used to, and I was worried it was all about climate change, but in fact, both New York State and the federal government have put in restrictions on catching some kind of fish. Yeah. So there's all these forage fish, they're called. They have a name called like Mayhaden or something, but they're much more abundant, and it means that tuna, big fish like bluefin and yellowfin tuna, are swimming closer to the shore. So a trip that would have used to take 10 to 12 hours, like round trip to go out and try and catch some fish, is now closer to 5 or 6. So if you have flown out to the Hamptons on a Friday night and gotten off the little Montauk airport,
Tim shaking his head
no, you can also drive out there, take the train, Jitney. But if you're on the dock at like sorry,
go ahead.
If you're on the dock at like 5 or 6 a.m., you're back by like 11 or 11:30 with hopefully some tuna, but there's also like sea bass and stripers and bluefish out there. And then you can buy coolers so the guy who did this, I should shout him out because he's great. His name is Will Kornacki, and he has Montauk Anglers Club, and he used to work at Goldman Sachs, actually.
Love this.
And then 2.5, it's his family business, the Montauk Anglers Club. So he joined them about 2.5 years ago. And since then, he's seen a lot of his peers like come up and take advantage of this. And it's, I kind of love it.
Everybody's talking to you about
really
this,
cool.
aren't they? Like coming up. Really cool stuff. See, you could do this.
We should do a remote out there on a afternoon after spending the morning out fishing. Why not?
There's a great picture of two dudes holding a huge tuna. It's like really impressive. So you can find that at Bloomberg.com. Really good stuff. Kate, thank you.
Thank you.
Kate Crater is Bloomberg Pursuit's food editor, and she's here in New York City. How lucky are we?
We're not letting you go back to London. I'm just going to tell you.
Okay.
We love having you here. That wraps up our weekend edition of Bloomberg Businessweek from Bloomberg Radio. Thank you so much for joining us.
I'm Tim Stenovec.
Time to go tuna fishing.
Yeah, let's go.
I'm Carol Massar. Have a good and safe weekend, everybody.
This is the Bloomberg Business Week podcast, available on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Listen live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, TuneIn, and the Bloomberg Business App. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.